Thank you very much, Kevin, and good Sabbath to everybody. So announcements. Let's see, there's several here. So the first announcement is that this week we had, which I am estimating probably about 100 attacks on our website. While it appears that the ne'er-do-wellers were unsuccessful, in my attempts to add further blocking to our website so that people could not get in, which I don't think they did, but they kept trying for about 3 days worth of attacks continually. And I get notices showing that they're coming in, that people trying to get in, and you can't really pinpoint where they're coming from. I think they're using an IP address scrambler, which basically makes the location of their device random anywhere in the world. In any case, there were some parts of our websites, in my attempts to block attacks on the site, some parts of our website became inoperable for a period of time. I spent about 5 to 6 hours rebuilding certain parts of the website this week, but it appears that there are still several links that, and some images as well, that are still affected by this. But so those of you who have noticed, we are aware of the situation, and will hopefully I'll be able to get to fixing the parts that are not functional right now early this next week. Let's see. This is just a bit of information. It doesn't affect everyone, but because Google will not accept a P.O. box in order to have a Google profile, which greatly increases your visibility on the web. We had listed the address of the hall that we meet in as the physical address for the Eternal Church of God. We do have a P.O. box, but clearly, but we don't own this building here. We just rent the building here, but we needed to have a physical address for the Google profile. And this message goes out to those who attend with us online occasionally, that to understand that if you're going to send us mail through the Postal Service, it goes to this hall. We don't own the hall. The people that own the hall are happy to forward the mail to us, and they have done that. We have received any mail that has come to us to this hall, but it does take a little bit more time for us to get to any letters that might be sent to the physical address on our Google profile. So we're not telling people not to use it. It is just preferable that if you're going to send us a letter, anything through the Postal Service, to use the church P.O. box. And that address is on our website, but I'll mention it now. The Eternal Church of God, P.O. Box 80248. And that is in Billings, Montana. 59108 is the zip code. So once again, that's P.O. Box 80248, Billings, Montana 59108. Tomorrow is the Feast of Weeks, and we will be meeting at our usual time, 11 a.m., but we will be meeting in a different location. We will be using a small conference room at the Homewood Suites. We met there on the, was it the last day of Unleavened Bread or the first? I can't remember. I think it was the first day of Unleavened Bread that we met there. Yes. Yes, it was. In any case, we will be using that same conference room. And so if there's anyone attending locally that is able to come and help set up the hall early, my wife and I would appreciate any assistance in that regard. And that leads to an announcement I made last week. We have mentioned several times over the last 6 months that the Eternal Church of God needs financial support in order to continue everything that we are doing. So it would be nice to have some more physical support. It's mostly Michelle and myself and my daughters setting up the hall and stuff. And Kevin has been leading songs frequently lately, which is greatly appreciated. But Kevin lives about 45 minutes from here, as well as the Parmans as well. They're quite a distance out in the Bradicks. And so, yeah, if there were was anybody that is fairly close, local, that wants to attend, pray that God send them our direction. Doesn't seem like God is calling as many people in our age as he has in the past, but he is still calling people. We still get requests for literature from people that have no Church of God experience. And over the years, we've had several of them have gotten back to us later telling us how thankful they were that they actually started attending a congregation in their area, and some of them have been baptized. So it's really great to hear that and good to be a part of that work. But of course, God could guide anybody he wants to wherever he desires, but he also expects us to make an effort to do something about it as well. That's why the commission was given to the church, to preach and teach and make disciples. That's all the announcements for today. And so let's go ahead and open up to Exodus and chapter 23. Exodus 23. Mr. Polici had mentioned in the prayer that he had hoped that the message would be something that would be rightly applied to everyone in their day-to-day life. And of course, that's always our hope. I was trained in my speaking abilities, and before I was ordained an elder actually, but I was trained from the perspective of inspiration through preparation. And you always want God to inspire your messages, and you pray for that. Often God wants to see, well, how bad do you want it? So how much work you're going to put into it. I spend many, many hours working on every sermon that is given from this lectern, and the effort that Art and myself have put into these messages over the years is in the hopes that people will gain inspiration through the information that is presented. My sermons have frequently over the years been information-based. I love information. I think it's great, and I think the more information that we have about the Bible, about God, and different aspects of Christian, which is godly living, the more inspired, hopefully, we should be to be more faithful to God and to more rightly apply the word of truth. And so the last two sermons that I had given discussed Christ's appearances within the weeks between the resurrection and the observance of Pentecost. And in those two sermons, we went through some great detail about the 8 known manifestations of Christ. Likely there were more appearances of Christ, but there are a minimum of 8 that are mentioned in the scriptures. And when I had given those two sermons, I put the appearances in chronological order, which I think is helpful for people to better understand how things played out and what went on there. And of course, throughout those appearances of Christ within the weeks, it leads us to the end of the 7th week, which is today. And today is the 49th day in the count to the Feast of Weeks, and tomorrow, therefore, is the 50th day. And Pentecost, a term that means 50 or 50th. And so our focus of Pentecost, at least at the Eternal Church of God for the last 14 or so years, has included the first resurrection of the dead. Now, not many in the Church of God have that understanding, and I don't think that the understanding of Pentecost and what it represents is something that's salvational. I think it is helpful, but our studies have proven that Pentecost does portray the first resurrection of the dead, and there are many indications of that. I'm not going to go through all of those indications today. I believe there's around 10 or 12 significant pieces of evidence about that, and you can find them in our book, which is called The Magnificent Meaning of God's Holy Days. But today, I would like to review a time similar to the count leading up to the Feast of Weeks. And this time is referred by God, it is called by God simply the 7th year. And the following decree in Exodus 23 and I'm going to read verses 10 through 11, This was given to Israel as a means to establish a healthy people and a prosperous economy in what was an agrarian-based society. And so God commanded in Exodus 23 in verses 10 through 11, he said, 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its produce. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. In like manner you shall do with your vineyard and your olive grove. And this is a very succinct set of instructions. We're going to read a little bit more about those instructions in just a few moments, but notice what is included with this decree. The very next sentence in verse 12 says, 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female servant and the stranger may be refreshed. So it's interesting that the commandment of the weekly Sabbath, this was made clear to the people of Israel long prior to this. 7 chapters, in fact, earlier when they were between Elim and Sinai. And then the 4th commandment was given when they were at Mount Sinai, an essential part of the 10 commandments. And now God says it again, repeats it a 3rd time, along with the proclamation of a sabbatical year, a 7th year of rest. And so mentioning the weekly Sabbath just after a yearly Sabbath, I don't believe this is just a coincidence. As people and livestock were given the 7th day, absent of work, so were the same given a 7th year, absent of working just the land. And so every 7th year, God says that whatever grows of itself, this would be given by God as food for both man, and what was left over would be for the animals. And this edict, therefore, it would prevent landowners from fencing off all of their property, knowing that the 7th year is coming, and making sure that people or animals could not get in and gather food for themselves. Now, the similarity between the 7th year of rest for the land and the 7th day of rest, it is striking. And there's more to it, much more to it, than 6 days reflected by 6 years and the 7th day reflected by a 7th year. And we're going to go into that during this message today. Let's go over to Leviticus 19. Leviticus chapter 19. Too far. There we go. Because all were to share in what grew of itself in the 7th year, it calls to mind a common practice among Israel of gleaning. Now, gleaning is something that was allowed every year, not just the 7th year. God always wanted, whether it be the poor, which Christ said, the poor you would always have with you, but he wanted strangers that were visiting, passing through perhaps, people that were friends of Israelites, but not Israelite by birth. He wanted them to be able to have food when they were staying in the area, and those people that lived there that were poor, that were in need, that he wanted them to be provided for through this process of gleaning. And so Leviticus 19 and verse 9 says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the eternal your God. In other words, this is something that God would do. So he gave people the same kind of principles, the same kind of values that he has, and says these are the things that you should apply. So even during the 6 years of reaping, landowners were to intentionally leave parts of the field or the grove unharvested, and preferably in areas that would be easily accessible to those who would come to glean. So not all the grain would be taken off of the stalks. There would be some left. Not every apple or orange plucked from the tree. Not every bunch of grapes from the vine. And this would be given to people for food. But the work of gleaning, of course, this wasn't something that was just so that those people who didn't really want to work, had no desire to work, that they would just have a free lunch. No, God said that, well, they have to go out and make an effort to get the food, to go out and gather the food themselves. So people in need were to go out and get the food. So let's go out, turn over a few pages to Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25. Now it goes without saying that those who may have been disabled, unable to go out and glean, that they would be forced to go try to work, using a cane or whatever to try to get around. Reminds me a little bit of how I felt the last couple of weeks with my back injury, walking around with a cane. Oh, by the way, I appreciate the prayers of those people who had prayed for my back injury. It's feeling much better. It's not entirely better. I don't know why this time it's a little different. Something seems to be taking a long time to get better. In any case, those people that had handicaps or disabilities, they would be provided for. Should be provided for through the efforts of others who would go out and gather food or donate food to them. But during the 7th year, this was a time when basically, if you think about it, basically everybody would be gleaning, because whatever grew of itself would be there for others. Even the landowners were to go and get food for themselves, throughout the year, the 7th year. Everyone partook of that which grew of itself, and that is an expression meaning that people did not till the ground, they did not sow the ground, they did not put down fertilizer that year. They didn't make efforts basically to encourage food production or to increase food production. Leviticus 25 adds more detail about how this mandate of the 7th year was to be applied. In Leviticus 25 and verse 2, it says, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Eternal. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Eternal. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard." Verse 5, "What grows of its own accord of your harvest you shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine, for it is a year of rest for the land. And the Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you. For you, your male and your female servants, your hired man and the stranger who dwells with you, for your livestock and the beasts that are in your land, all its produce shall be for food." So this names the 7th year a Sabbath of rest. Now, it's interesting that a similar description is given to the 7th day of rest. And it helps us, I think, to understand that there's a connection between these days, but also a connection in our count to Pentecost. And we'll talk about that toward the end of the message today. But consider, if you will, the like phrasing of this commandment here in Leviticus 25 and the 4th commandment found in Exodus 20. In Exodus 20 and verse 9 it says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. In Leviticus 25 and verse 3 that we had just read, it says, 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. In other words, do the work of the land. Leviticus 25 and verse 4 says that in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Eternal. In Exodus 20 and verse 10, the 4th commandment says that the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Eternal your God. And in Exodus 20 it says, in it, regarding the 7th day, in it you shall do no work, nor your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your cattle, or the stranger that is within your gates. And Leviticus 25 regarding the seventh year says, you shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. So there's similar phrasing between these two commands. Now, it's not entirely similar, because on the seventh day, people were not to work at all. But in the seventh year, people were simply not to work the land. And these two commands, though, they're very similar in many other ways, and it seems to be intentional and uses like terms to describe them both. So one is a day, that's a difference. The other is a year. And God, of course, he does not indicate that everybody would take a 12-month day off, 12-month period of time off of work during the seventh year. Clearly, there were many other chores and tasks that would be needed to be done on any property or in any society, even when you're not working the land. But no working the land with large-scale operations, particularly for commercial purposes, and of course no work to cultivate the land. Now, along these lines, my gardening experience, my personal gardening experience over the last, it's getting close to 2 decades now, has allowed me to implement a seventh-year land, rest for the land on the small plots that my family have had use of. And I've found that even when you don't till, you don't sow, you don't fertilize, there is still a level of maintenance that is required on any land that is used for agricultural purposes. Because if you allow agricultural property to just go wild throughout the year, it will quickly return to grass. You'll get all kinds of weeds and undesirable plants coming up in the property, and many of them will be, and I've seen this literally, chest high by midsummer. So unless God would miraculously control the growth of undesirable plants, flora, you lump them together with the term weeds, basically anything that is growing on your property that you don't want to grow there, you just call it a weed, even though it's technically not a weed. But unless God miraculously controlled that kind of growth, there would still be necessary a level of maintenance on the property, so that the following year, because if you let it go and you say, well, I'm not going to do anything to it that year, that's fine, just let it go. The following year, the work is going to be so difficult, you're going to be consumed with trying to remove all the weeds that covered the property and went to seed and is now seeding again and growing up all over the place during the seventh year. Now, there are methods, of course, to minimize this, and I have applied some of those methods, and they work pretty good. Methods such as covering the topsoil. I've chosen to use a method of using either 4 to 5 layers of newspaper. Sometimes you can use cardboard, which works very well. Of course, remove anything you don't want in the cardboard, like staples or plastic tape or whatever. And you can put it down over the piece of property, and then put, I like to use a mixture of leaves and wood chips and grass on top and just let it sit. And that keeps a lot of the growth down, a lot. And then when you come back the next year, the cardboard or the newspaper is actually preferable, which has soy-based inks. Most newspaper has soy-based inks. That has broken down, and the soil underneath is just great. It's just wonderful to use. But even so, even if you use those methods, you're still going to get a measure of undesirable flora coming up. And you're going to need to deal with that, whether you, in some fashion, you can, whether it's pulling it out or chopping it down or what have you. Now, of course, if you chose to use unnatural methods, such as a chemical concoction or perhaps sheets of plastic to cover the property, that'll keep the growth down quite a bit. I would not recommend it, of course, because it's unnatural. It's not healthy for the soil and for the people that would eat the produce from the land to use all these chemical herbicides or pesticides or what have you. And of course, plastic, if you're going to use something like that, which is a new invention, a relatively new invention, it's been around for a long time, but wasn't used in ancient times. If you use that, it traps a lot of the heat in. And so the microbes and those things in the soil throughout the season or the weeks or months or however long you have the plastic on the piece of land, those things get killed, they die off. And it's not good for healthy soil anyway. Oh, you'll probably get, you're sure to get something to grow the next year, but it's not going to be the quality that you would like. And so my conclusion is that a rest for the land, I don't think it meant that people could not do anything to the land. But there's nothing mentioned about undesirable plants. There's nothing mentioned about weeds. You know, what do you do about weeding? It's left unsaid. But the context of the forbidden work during the 7th year appears to be things like tilling, sowing, pruning, and reaping. You know, no commercial harvesting during that year. But there is nothing said about the undesirable foliage. You know, it seems to come out of nowhere, actually. You could leave the land that year and you're like, oh, it's cleared off nice, you got it all nice, but then spring hits within a couple months into spring, and it was like, whoa, all of this stuff just starts coming up everywhere. But of course, some of it is desirable. If you do let that go, you'd have to learn to spot what is wanted to be on the land. Some of it comes back and it's actually produce is going to be in the mix of the weeds and what have you. So there are many benefits to a rest for the land. And many people don't realize that this was not just so that the poor would have a bountiful amount of food every 7th year. This was also a way to preserve and to improve the quality of the crops. The soil that is found on this planet is very special. And you've heard the expression, I'm sure all of us have heard the expression, cheap as dirt. But although dirt is not expensive, it's invaluable, the soil on this planet, because it contains billions of microorganisms that work together harmoniously to create an environment that is ideal for plant, animal, and human life. Now, not all soil around the planet is of the same quality. Some is better than others, but generally speaking, dirt contains the essentials needed to sustain life. I had read an article some time ago that talked about the astronauts and how they had gathered samples of lunar soil and brought it back to be examined and found that it was a mixture of monomineral fragments and various kinds of glass. So entirely unusable for any kind of agriculture. The Mars rover found that although the soil on Mars has some essential minerals, the composition of that soil renders it useless, entirely useless to support any form of life whatsoever. So the soil on the Earth is something very special. I believe it's something unique to not just the solar system, but likely to the galaxy. But it requires a measure of care. It wasn't designed to be polluted with toxic chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, and in order to preserve and to improve the quality of the soil that is used for agricultural, you start, of course, with the soil itself. I mean, in order to improve and to sustain the quality of the produce of the land, you start with the soil. That's what I wanted to say. You start with where those plants grow. Continual farming without efforts to replenish the minerals and the nutrients that are in the soil and that is taken out during years of harvest, it depletes the soil of those things that are necessary for healthy food. And so the soil therefore needs to heal. It needs to heal itself. And God designed it so that dirt, earth, soil, that it would heal itself, that it would replenish what it needs to produce healthy food if we would let it rest every 7 years. Now, many farmers today, they practice something called crop rotation. I'm sure you've heard of it, where they rotate different crops to different parts of the property in order that all the minerals, the vitamins, what have you, that is in the soil isn't depleted by because certain crops really use up a lot of a particular type of mineral, and so you don't want to keep growing that in the same area because you're going to run out of that, and so they move it around so that certain minerals will be replenished throughout the year. But there are very few, actually, a relative few, who actually practice a land rest every 7 years. And there are various reasons why most farmers do not practice that, and most of them are financial reasons. But ecologists agree that a periodic land rest is of great benefit to both the land and to the health of those people who consume the food, the produce from that land. However, because the vast majority of farmers do not practice a sabbatical year, if you want to call it that, some people refer to it as a sabbatical, chemical companies have produced various inorganic fertilizers to attempt to simulate what the soil would do on its own if you left it alone every 7 years, something it would do naturally by God's design. And, by the way, if you did it the way God designed, you would have much better results. Deuteronomy 15, Deuteronomy 15, along with the 7th year rest for the land, God said that there would also be a nationwide release of debt during that same year. So, unless a person is born into a rich family, continual wealth, or perhaps somebody finds a way to make a lot of money that is going to sustain them and their children for a lifetime, debt is something that is extremely difficult to avoid. Whether it's purchasing a home in our age, you think about purchasing a home or a vehicle or a piece of property. There are very few that have the ability to pay outright for something like that, something that would cost, many times tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And even in a college education today is something that very few can afford without going into debt. So people get what's called student loans, and they'll spend the next several decades of their life paying it off. When I looked it up recently, tuition and fees for colleges around the country alone, they range from $6,000 to $16,000. Living expenses on or off campus is anywhere from $13,000 to $20,000 a year, depending on the state, of course. Books and other course materials are about $1,000, they say, annually. I would suggest it's a lot more than that. Of course, this depends on the courses that you're taking in school, because this is a money-making thing. I mean, books alone, when I went to college, most of the book by itself cost well over $100 just for a book, which, it doesn't cost that to produce those books. Oh, sure, they're nice hardcover books, but when you order something in quantity, like they're ordering hundreds of thousands of these books, they're getting them probably about $5 a pop, something like that, and yet charging well over $100 per book. In any case, these are just some of the debts that people get into in order to better their life, and or to just sustain, a comfortable life. Many of us had, and personally I've had to do this, had to go into debt for dental work. Or health-related expenses. You know, God forbid something happens where we need to go to the hospital and be hospitalized, and it's just, the bill is going to be astronomical. And so how do you pay that? They say, well, we'll let you pay it off. We'll give you a line of credit. And then, of course, you have to pay interest on that. And that is probably, in my opinion, of course, getting sick or needing dental work is not pleasant at all. But when it comes to debt, the most unpleasant part of debt is, to me anyway, is the fact that you're going to end up paying a lot more than the asking price. And so even though debt has always been a part of life in a free society, God did not intend for people to spend a lifetime in debt. So Israel was such a free society. People were free pretty much to do what they wanted within the boundaries of God's law, of course. And, you know, in many ways, it's much like America. At least it was when America was founded and had good principles. People could choose what kind of career they wanted to go into, you know, various forms of entertainment, or what clothes you want to wear, or what kind of home you want to build or live in. And of course, all this is to be done within the framework of law and order. And that's how it was when God established Israel as a nation in the Middle East. So in that land, in Israel, ancient Israel, people incurred debt. However, under God's rule, in conclusion of the 7th year of rest for land, God declared that there would be a release of debt for those people who found themselves in need of financial assistance during the previous years. And that's important. Those in need, not just they want, but they need it. So Deuteronomy 15 in verse 1 says this. It says, at the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release of debts. And this is the form of the release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not require it of his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Well, this was a great blessing not just to the people who had debt. It was carried out by people and, of course, for people, but a release of debt was also a way for people to honor God, a way to serve God by doing this. Because sometimes people forget that serving God is much more than just praying. It's much more than just attending a Sabbath service. It's frequently, and in fact, most frequently done by the service that we provide to others. That is why Christ referred to us as being a light, you know, a beacon of goodness, something that people can see, not just walking around, you know, in prayer all the time, but actually doing something, helping other people, and of course, helping people that are God's people. So those who had much or more than enough, they would be given the opportunity to give something back. Now, interestingly, not all debt was to be or had to be forgiven. I think any of it could be, but not all of it had to be forgiven. That's why I stressed a need previously. In verse 3 it says, of a foreigner you may require it. In other words, they're not part of God's people, so you can require them to continue to need to pay their debt. But you shall give your claim to what is owed by your brother, except when there may be no poor among you. So if everybody's doing well financially, hey, you know, there's no need to release the debt. For the Lord will greatly bless you in the land which the eternal your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance. Only if you carefully obey the voice of the eternal your God to observe with care all these commandments which I command you today. So the blessings of God will be immeasurable, so much that it's like, wow, this is coming if you obey all these commandments, if you do all of these things. Now, something that I've noticed in my studies of this subject over the years is that I could not find anywhere in any history book, and I didn't consult fully the Mishnah or the Talmud, and I actually don't recommend it. It's kind of interesting, but I don't consider most of those writings inspired by God. But I could not find anywhere where Israel actually applied the year of land rest or the year of release every seventh year, or the Jubilee, which we're going to talk about at the end of the sermon very briefly. Now, this isn't to say people did not apply it. Maybe they did, but I couldn't find any record of it. Nothing in the Bible, and nothing in extra biblical writings. Though it is possible, and if somebody is aware of an extra biblical writing somewhere where it shows that, oh yeah, actually they did this every 7 years, I would love to see it. I'd like to have that. In any case, God said that those who were not citizens of Israel were not allowed some of the benefits of being a part of that nation. So in other words, I kind of think this is a way of encouraging people to be a part of it. Hey, don't you want to be a part of this? Isn't this something great? I mean, you should want to be a part of it. Wonderful things are happening here. But if you don't want to be a part of it, that's fine. You're not going to reap the benefits of being a part of God's people. And it's similar, I think, to some of the laws of this land, which are, they're not supposed to. All the laws are not supposed to entirely apply to, people that are criminals or people that come into the country illegally. But it seems like there's been this push mostly from the left to give anybody, even if they're not a citizen, the same benefits that American citizens are allowed. In any case, if those who were a part of the nation, as God pointed out, were doing very well financially, then there'd be no need to release debt to others because everybody's doing well. I mean, this is fine. It's okay. That payment isn't hurting me. I still have plenty. It's fine. And there is also, I think, applied in here and this concept of people paying a fair share. So, that's something that I think many people would be considered, I guess, conservative or on the conservative right today. They don't like that concept of like people paying a fair share. That seems to be something more applied to the leftist socialist movements of today. But it's really not a socialist concept for people to pay their fair share. If some people have more, they should be required to pay a little more than others. But and this applies to something that is mentioned in this command for the year of release, and that's, I guess you could call it like indulgences. Something that is wanted but not desired. Desired but not needed. Like they want to have something or experience something, but it's not really anything you need. You're doing fine without it. And there's nothing wrong with indulgences as far as enjoying yourself, enjoying some of the things that God has allowed for us to enjoy on this planet. There's nothing wrong with wanting to go out on a boat and go fishing or to have a nicer vehicle than the one that keeps falling apart all the time. There's nothing wrong with those things. But is there a need? Is there a need for something? And if there's not a need, should debt be retained for those things that were not a necessity? And I think that was what God is relating here, that if it's debt that was incurred for something that was not a necessity of life, or a necessity of livelihood, then there would be no need to release the debt. And again, God, it's rational. It's just logical. God is rational. The Bible's rational. It makes a lot of sense. All of his laws that he requires make sense. And God said when followed that the nation would be blessed enormously. In verses 6 through 8, it says that the eternal your God will bless you just as he promised you. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. You shall reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over you. If there is among you a poor man of your brethren within any of the gates in your land which the Eternal your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him and willingly lend him sufficient for his need, whatever he need. Again, it's what is necessary, a need, not just something that's wanted. So God is basically, he's saying here, is there needs to be a good reason to release the debt. And it doesn't mean that debt could not be, I don't think he's saying you shall not release debt to those who have plenty. He isn't saying that, but he's saying it's not necessary, that they can retain the debt. And the next verses, 9 through 11, God continues with some more rational thought of how to apply the year of release, and he gives a warning. And this is interesting. He gives a warning to those who might try to work the situation to fit their own best interests. In verse 9, Deuteronomy 15, verse 9, beware lest there be a wicked thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release, is at hand, and your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing. And he cry out to the Eternal against you, and it becomes sin among you. You shall surely give to him, and your heart should not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing the Eternal your God will bless you in all your works, and in all to which you put your hand. For the poor will never cease from the land. And therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor, and your needy in the land. So in case you don't understand exactly what God is saying here, is basically he's saying, if you see the year of release coming, and yet people are in need, and you're going, well, wait a minute, they're not going to have to retain the debt because next year is the year of release, and if I give them this assistance now, I'm not going to get anything back because I have to release the debt because they're poor. Well, that's kind of looking out for your own best interest, isn't it? So God is saying, don't do that. If there's a need, fulfill the need. Doesn't matter where you are on the yearly calendar. It doesn't matter when the year of release is coming or the Jubilee. If there's a need, there's a need. Fulfill it. And remember what God said previously. And he says it again. You will be blessed for this. Don't worry about it. You're going to be taken care of. It's not like you're going to go without. In the next verses, we see that a release of debt also applied to indentured servants. And this, indentured servants were common, and it was a way of paying back your debt. In Deuteronomy 15 and verse 12, if your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and serves you 6 years, then in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And on top of this, when you send him away free from you, you shall not let him go away empty-handed. In other words, you don't want to just say, okay, you're done, time to get out, and they have nothing. They have nowhere to go, no property. What are they going to do? I mean, you got to provide for it. They would just become poor again. So you shall supply him liberally from your flock, from your threshing floor, from your winepress. From what the Eternal has blessed you with, you shall give to him. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. In other words, you had nothing. And the Eternal your God redeemed you and gave you everything. And therefore I command you this thing today. And if it happens that he says to you, I will not go away from you, because he loves you and your house, since he prospers with you, then you will, this is talking about somebody wanting to retain their employment as a servant, then you shall take an awl and thrust it through his ear to the door, and he shall be your servant forever. So basically it's talking about piercing their ear. Also to your female servant you shall do likewise. And it shall not seem hard to you when you send him away free from you, for he has been worth a double hired servant in serving you 6 years. Then the Eternal your God will bless you in all that you do. There are other details about this in Exodus 21. I'm not going to turn over there, but when we read all of these requirements, we see that they are entirely fair, they are rational, and they just make good sense. This would ensure a prosperous society of God's people where, the playing fields would not always favor those that are rich or famous. Now, there's nothing wrong with wealth. God is not against having wealth, and he's not against popularity. But it can lead to corruption if not kept in check, and this is a way God kept things in check. So the year of release, it would force those attempting to build financial empires to be unable to do so. People would not be able to corner markets, to accumulate much land for themselves, taking over land that should belong to somebody else. And it would require everybody in the land and those people who had much to not forget God. Don't forget where all of this came from. And this leads to the conclusion of the sermon, which has much to do with tomorrow's observance of Pentecost. So let's go back to Deuteronomy 25. Pentecost is officially called the Feast of Weeks. And this was the name that God gave it back when he declared the annual holy days to the nation of Israel. The Feast of Weeks is the only holy day that must be counted, that has to be counted from the first day of the week that occurs within the Feast of Passover. And God said to count 7 weeks and 1 day to the 50th day, and then to celebrate his feast. Now, in all the Bible, every book, every chapter, every page of the Bible, there is only one other count that is similar to the count to the Feast of Weeks. And it's the count to the Jubilee. And it includes what we had talked about for the majority of the sermon, the 7th year. So right after declaring the 7th year rest for the land in Leviticus 25, God said in verse 8, "And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. And you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land. And you shall consecrate the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of its own accord, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine. For it is the Jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its produce from the field." So in other words, what was done every 7th year, when it comes to the 50th year, it was to be done 2 years in a row. The 49th and the 50th year. "In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his possession. And if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand, you shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your neighbor, and according to the number of years of crops, he shall sell to you." So in other words, he's talking about a percentage here. So you can figure in a percentage. If we're like, well, how long did you have the property before the Jubilee? You can figure a percentage of how much should be returned. "According to the multitude of years, you shall increase its price, and according to the fewer number of years, you shall diminish its price. For he sells to you according to the number of years of the crops. And therefore you shall not oppress one another, but you shall fear your God. For I am the eternal your God. So you shall observe my statutes and keep my judgments and perform them. And you will dwell in the land in safety. And then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and dwell there in safety. And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, since we shall not sow nor gather in our produce? Then I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, and it will bring forth produce enough for 3 years. And you shall sow in the 8th year. So here's a difference here to the 50th year, that you're able to sow. You don't plant, but you're able to sow, and eat produce until the 9th year. And until its produce comes in, you shall eat of the old harvest. Now this is a fascinating edict, and it comes with an amazing promise that God is going to take. Oh, you might think you're going to lose, you're going to miss out. What are we going to do? We're going to starve. He's saying, no, no, no. This is going to be well for you. It's going to actually, you're going to be even better off than you were previously if you follow these commands. Now, the count to the Jubilee is similar to the count to Pentecost. When counting to the Jubilee, God used the same method. He exchanged, of course, days for years, and we're aware of the day for a year principle. So the count to the Feast of Weeks is 7 days of 7 weeks, a total of 49 plus 1. The count to the Jubilee is 7 sets of 7 years, a total of 49 plus 1. And because they share the same additions and also the same summation, it must be that God intended for there to be a similarity to what these days and these celebrations portray. And we'll hear more about that tomorrow.